I'm sure many of you have heard the old story about an astronaut who traveled far into space. He went beyond the Earth, beyond the moon, deep into the stars. And when he returned, people gathered around him, curious and full of questions. They asked him, "Did you go to heaven? Did you see God?" And the astronaut answered, "Yes." That surprised everyone. You could imagine the silence in the room. Then someone asked the question on everyone's mind, "Well, what about God? What did you see?" And the astronaut calmly replied, "She is black." It's a short story, but it's been told many times in different ways. Maybe you've heard it too. Some people take it lightly, some laugh, others just brush it off as a clever joke. But if you really think about it, not just the words but what they point to, it carries a powerful message. It asks us to challenge our assumptions and look deeper. I once knew a monk who had his own journey of transformation. At first, he didn't believe in God. He wasn't hostile about it. He just didn't see the need to believe. He was more of an agnostic, maybe even an atheist. But something changed when he began reading the writings of the French philosopher Henri Bergson. Bergson spoke of something called the élan vital, which means vital force or life energy. It's the creative force that flows through all living things. It's not a machine, not a formula, but a kind of inner drive that gives life its movement and direction. As the monk kept reading, he slowly began to see that this vital force wasn't just a scientific idea. It was pointing to something deeper, something sacred. It began to sound a lot like what many people would call God. I've also come across many books, essays, and arguments that try to prove the existence of God. A lot of them start with a simple but deep idea. If we as human beings are intelligent, thoughtful, emotional, and self-aware, how could we possibly be the product of something random or meaningless? The argument goes like this: figs don't grow on thorn bushes, and grapes don't grow on weeds. In the same way, intelligent life doesn't just grow out of a dead, empty universe. If the universe brings forth life, especially intelligent, conscious life, then whatever gave birth to the universe must be full of life and intelligence too. Just like fruit comes from a tree that's alive, conscious beings must come from something greater than themselves, something alive, something with purpose. But when you reach that kind of understanding, it's important not to rush ahead. There's a natural tendency to make a quick jump. You might think, so this creative force, this source of life, must be the God of the Bible. But that can be a mistake, because the God described in many parts of the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, is shown as a strong, father-like figure, a ruler, a lawgiver. He's powerful, commanding, and often portrayed as male. That image of God as a man with a beard, sitting on a throne, didn't appear out of nowhere. It was shaped by ancient cultures, where authority figures were usually male, where kings ruled with strict laws, and where strength was seen in firm leadership. Over time, this image stuck. It became tradition. And that tradition was passed down through religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Today, that picture is so common that many people accept it without even thinking. Society, churches, and religious institutions have repeated it over and over. God is the Father. God is the Lord. Even Jesus used the word Father when speaking of God, not because it was the only way to describe the divine, but because it made sense in the culture he lived in. It was a language people could understand. But we live in a different time now. Many of us are starting to rethink that image. We're asking questions. We're wondering if God has to look or sound like an old man in the sky. And just because someone challenges that image doesn't mean they're turning away from faith. In fact, there's an idea called atheism in the name of God. It may sound strange, but it means letting go of false images and ideas, not to reject God, but to get closer to the truth of who or what God really is. Some religious thinkers are uncomfortable with that. They want God to be fixed, clear, and firm. For them, God is a ruler who sets rules. You follow those rules, you're rewarded. You break them, you're punished. This is often called ethical monotheism. It focuses on laws, obedience, and judgment. But that way of thinking can create a barrier. It can make people feel afraid, or ashamed. It can turn faith into fear. Instead of drawing people closer to the source of life, it can push them away. That's why stories like the one about the astronaut matter. They help us question. They help us imagine. They remind us that maybe God isn't who we thought. Maybe God is beyond all our images. Maybe God is mystery, creativity, love, and life itself, bigger than language, beyond gender and full of surprises. Some people never grow out of this way of thinking. They always feel like there's a big, powerful figure watching over them, judging their every move. They think of God the same way they once thought of their grandfathers, strong, distant, and strict. But I'm a grandfather now. I have 5 grandchildren, and I know I'm just as confused and imperfect as my own grandfathers were. So why should I fear a God made in that image? Most intelligent people today don't really believe in an old man in the sky. Not seriously. They say things like, God is spirit, or God is beyond understanding. But deep inside, the old image is still there. When people sing hymns or read the Bible, they still picture that man with a beard sitting in the clouds. That image lives deep in their emotions, even if their minds have moved on. So maybe it's time to imagine God differently. What if instead of God the Father, we imagined God the Mother? What if God was feminine? In philosophy, the feminine is often linked with what's called the negative principle. That doesn't mean bad or wrong. It just means it's the opposite of what's loud, active, and obvious. But in our culture, negative sounds like a bad word. We say things like, focus on the positive, which is actually a very male-centered way of thinking. But the truth is, you can't have one without the other. You can't understand what is strong unless you've also known what is gentle. You can't appreciate light unless there is darkness. You need both to make sense of anything. The feminine, what seems soft, dark, or quiet, is actually where life begins. It is what holds everything up, but we often ignore it. Think of a drawing on a piece of paper. We look at the drawing, but we forget the paper is there. Or think of a printed book. We read the words, but don't think about the page they're printed on. But without the paper, without the space, there would be no picture or words. This quiet background is what we call substance, what everything rests on. And that's what the feminine side of God represents. It's the space, the darkness, the foundation of all things. When you look at the night sky, you see stars shining, but you only see them because of the dark space behind them. Without space, there would be no stars. Scientists are now learning that stars aren't just floating in space. They're connected to space. They come from it. But this is hard for us to understand because we think space is just emptiness. We forget that it's actually the most basic thing in existence. It's the same with our consciousness. No one really knows what consciousness is. It's not a thing you can touch or measure. It's the background of everything we experience. And because it's so constant, we don't notice it. We focus on the things we see, the sounds we hear, the thoughts we have, but we ignore the awareness behind it all. You can't really look at your own head. You can't look directly at your eye with your eye. In the same way you can't fully see or describe the source of your own being. But it's always there, just like space, just like consciousness, and that source, whatever it is deeply mysterious. Different spiritual teachers have given it different names. Dionysius called it the luminous darkness. In India, some called it Shunyata, the void. Others called it Brahman, the thing beyond all words, beyond all ideas. This isn't atheism. Not really. In fact, it's one of the most spiritual and deeply religious ways of seeing life. It's not about rejecting God. It's about stepping beyond the images we've made, the boxes we've built, and the names we've forced onto something that was never meant to be contained. It's about trusting the mystery completely, fully. And that takes courage, because letting go of control is one of the hardest things we can do. When we try to shrink God down into an idea, a doctrine, or a familiar shape, what we're really doing is protecting ourselves. We want something solid, something safe to hold on to, something that fits into our world. But real faith doesn't work like that. Real faith asks us to step out into the unknown. It invites us to release our grip, to stop trying to define the divine, and to simply. And when you do that, when you stop chasing after fixed images, old traditions and second-hand beliefs, something extraordinary begins to unfold. You might discover that the great mystery behind all things, the source of the stars, the rhythm of the oceans, the breath in your lungs, it's not distant, it's not far away, sitting on a throne in some unreachable heaven. It's here, it's always been here, and it's not separate from you. In fact, it is you, not the you made of thoughts, roles and memories, not your past or your personality, but the deep, quiet presence beneath all that. The silent awareness that's always watching, always still. That part of you that doesn't need a name or a story to exist. You can't hold it. You can't define it. And you don't have to. Because it's already here. Already shining through your eyes, breathing through your chest, pulsing in every cell of your body. It's the sacred in its purest form, not dressed in robes or written in books, but alive in this moment. And when you awaken to that, you realize something beautiful. You don't need to follow strict rules or cling to ancient images to be close to the divine. You don't need fear to guide you. All you need is presence, trust, a willingness to let go and truly live. So if this message stirred something in you, if it made you pause, reflect or breathe a little deeper, I invite you to stay connected, subscribe for more reflections like this, and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts and see how far this message is reaching. Let's explore the mystery together.